Thomas Webb pushed his cleaning cart down the dim corridor of Storage Bay 7, the wheels squeaking in rhythm with his tired footsteps. After 16 years working as a janitor on the Crossroads station, he knew every hallway, every corner, every stain that refused to come out no matter how hard he scrubbed. The station served as a major hub for interstellar trade, hosting dozens of alien species each day. Thomas had seen creatures with 6 arms, beings made of living crystal, and things that defied easy description. Yet despite the wonders surrounding him, he remained invisible to most, just another human doing the work nobody else wanted to do. The storage bay contained hundreds of cargo containers waiting for processing. Ships came and went, leaving behind crates of goods, specimens, and materials from across the known galaxy. Thomas's job was simple: keep the areas clean, report any leaks or damage, and stay out of everyone's way. He had learned long ago not to ask questions about the contents of sealed containers. Curiosity had no place in his line of work. Tonight, the station felt quieter than usual. Most of the traders had departed after the weekly market, and the skeleton crew on duty paid him no attention as he made his rounds. Thomas appreciated these peaceful hours. He could work at his own pace, listen to old Earth music through his headphones, and pretend he was somewhere else entirely. His daughter back on Earth had sent him a message earlier that day, telling him about her new job at a veterinary clinic. She had always loved animals, even as a small child. Thomas smiled at the memory of her bringing home injured birds and stray cats, convinced she could heal anything with enough care and patience. A sound interrupted his thoughts. It was faint, almost imperceptible beneath the hum of the station's life support systems. Thomas stopped pushing his cart and pulled out one headphone. There it was again, a weak, chirping noise coming from somewhere nearby. He frowned and followed the sound to a cluster of containers marked with symbols he didn't recognize. The chirping grew louder as he approached a medium-sized crate that had been pushed against the wall, half hidden behind larger cargo. Thomas knelt down and examined the container. It bore the markings of the Zenthari Empire, one of the more aggressive species in the galactic community. The crate had several small holes punched through its sides, and a thin crack ran along one edge. He pressed his ear to the surface and heard the chirping again, more desperate this time. Something alive was trapped inside, and it sounded distressed. He should have walked away. Station regulations were clear about interfering with sealed cargo. Thomas had followed those rules for 16 years without exception. But the chirping reminded him of the baby birds his daughter used to rescue, and he found his hands moving before his mind could stop them. He grabbed a pry bar from his cart and wedged it into the crack. The container's seal broke with a hiss of escaping air. Inside, nestled in a bed of shredded material, lay a creature unlike anything Thomas had ever seen. It was roughly the size of a football, covered in damp, pale scales that seemed to shimmer even in the low light. 4 small limbs ended in delicate claws, and a long tail curled around its body. The creature's head was oversized for its body, with large eyes that remained closed. It chirped again, a sound filled with such misery that Thomas felt his chest tighten. The creature was dying. Even without medical training, Thomas could see that much. Its breathing came in shallow gasps, and its scales had a dull, gray tinge that suggested severe dehydration or illness. The container had been designed to keep it alive during transport, but the crack had compromised the environmental controls. Who knew how long the poor thing had been suffering in there? Thomas reached in and carefully lifted the creature. It weighed almost nothing, and he could feel its rapid heartbeat against his palms. The creature's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing irises of deep violet that seemed to hold an ancient intelligence. Then they closed again, and the chirping faded to barely a whisper. He looked around the empty storage bay. No cameras pointed at this particular section, a blind spot he had discovered years ago. If he reported this now, station security would take over. They would follow protocols, file reports, and most likely let the creature die while they sorted out jurisdiction and ownership issues. The Zenthari were notorious for their bureaucracy and their complete lack of concern for individual lives. This hatchling would become a footnote in some cargo manifest, nothing more. Thomas made his decision. He wrapped the creature in his cleaning rag and placed it gently in the bottom compartment of his cart, covering it with supplies. His hands shook as he pushed the cart toward the service corridors. What was he doing? He could lose his job, face criminal charges for theft, or worse. The Zenthari didn't take kindly to interference with their property. But as he felt the faint vibration of the creature's heartbeat through the cart, he knew he couldn't abandon it. His quarters were small and sparse, befitting his status as maintenance crew. The room contained a narrow bed, a desk with a personal computer terminal, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom. Thomas had few personal possessions after years of living in such tight spaces. He cleared his desk and created a makeshift nest using towels and his spare blanket. Then he carefully transferred the creature from his cart and placed it in the soft hollow. The hatchling lay motionless except for its labored breathing. Thomas pulled up his computer terminal and began searching through the station's database. He needed to identify the species first, then figure out what it needed to survive. The search took nearly an hour, cross-referencing images and descriptions until he found a match that made his blood run cold. The creature was a Dravixen, a species he had heard of only in passing. The Dravixen had once been one of the most powerful and respected races in the galaxy, known for their wisdom, their mastery of advanced technologies, and their role as peacekeepers among the stars. But that was ancient history. According to the records, the Dravixen had gone extinct over 2 centuries ago, wiped out by a plague that swept through their homeworlds. The few surviving specimens existed only in private collections or research facilities, treated as curiosities rather than living beings. If this was truly a Dravixen hatchling, its value was incalculable. No wonder someone had sealed it in a cargo container. The black market for extinct species commanded prices that could buy entire planets. Thomas felt sick as he realized what fate awaited the creature if he hadn't found it. Some wealthy collector would have kept it in a cage, a trophy to display to impressed guests. He turned back to the hatchling and watched its chest rise and fall in weak, irregular patterns. The database provided basic information about Dravixen biology, but most of it was outdated or incomplete. They were reptilian in nature, requiring specific temperature ranges and humidity levels. They were carnivorous, feeding on a diet of protein-rich meats, and they were highly intelligent, with hatchlings developing cognitive abilities within days of emerging from their eggs. Thomas adjusted the temperature in his quarters, pushing it higher than was comfortable for him. He filled his bathroom sink with warm water and placed damp towels around the nest to increase humidity. Then he faced his next problem: food. The creature needed to eat, but he had no idea what to feed it. The station's cafeteria wouldn't have anything suitable, and ordering exotic meats would raise questions he couldn't afford to answer. He settled on the most basic option available. Thomas rushed to the cafeteria during the night shift and purchased several packages of processed protein supplements, the kind used by various species for emergency rations. Back in his quarters, he mixed the powder with water to create a thin paste. The hatchling needed nutrients, and this was the best he could offer on short notice. Getting the creature to eat proved more difficult than he anticipated. The hatchling refused to open its mouth, its eyes remaining shut. Thomas tried gently prying its jaws apart, but he feared causing injury. Finally, he dipped his finger in the paste and rubbed it along the creature's lips. The hatchling's tongue flicked out instinctively, tasting the mixture. It recoiled at first, but hunger overcame hesitation. Slowly, painfully slowly, Thomas managed to get small amounts of food into the creature's mouth. Hours passed as he worked. His shift would start in a few hours, and he had accomplished none of his assigned tasks. But for the first time in years, Thomas felt like he was doing something that mattered. This fragile life depended entirely on him. No one else knew it existed. No one else would care if it lived or died. The weight of that responsibility should have terrified him, but instead, it filled him with purpose. As dawn approached in the station's artificial cycle, the hatchling's breathing seemed marginally better. Its scales had regained a hint of their shimmer, and it had managed to swallow several mouthfuls of the protein mixture. Thomas knew this was just the beginning. The creature needed proper care, medical attention, and resources he couldn't provide alone. But those were problems for later. Right now, he had kept it alive through the night, and that was enough. He collapsed on his bed for a brief rest, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. The hatchling chirped softly from its nest, a sound less desperate than before. Thomas smiled and let sleep claim him, unaware that his simple act of compassion had set in motion events that would reshape the fate of countless worlds. The following days established a pattern that consumed Thomas's entire existence. He would complete his janitorial duties as quickly as possible, rushing through his rounds with an efficiency born of urgency. Every free moment was spent in his quarters, tending to the hatchling. He had begun calling it Little One in his mind, unable to think of it as merely a specimen or a creature. The name felt inadequate, but it was better than nothing. Little One grew stronger with each passing day, though progress came in tiny increments that would have been imperceptible to anyone less attentive. Its breathing steadied, its scales brightened from dull gray to a lustrous pearl color, and its eyes began staying open for longer periods. Those violet eyes followed Thomas around the room with an intensity that was both unsettling and thrilling. The intelligence he saw there was undeniable. Thomas expanded his research, spending his off hours diving deep into what little information existed about the Dravixen. Much of what he found was contradictory or incomplete, filtered through the lens of species that had their own agendas and biases. But certain facts emerged consistently. The Dravixen had possessed abilities that other species considered nearly magical, a form of telepathic communication, an innate understanding of complex systems, and a lifespan that stretched across centuries. They had served as mediators in countless conflicts, their neutrality and wisdom respected across the galaxy. Their extinction had created a power vacuum that the more aggressive species had rushed to fill. The Zenthari Empire had been one of the primary beneficiaries, expanding their territory and influence in the absence of Dravixen oversight. Some historians believe the plague that wiped out the Dravixen hadn't been natural at all, but rather a biological weapon deployed by those who saw them as obstacles to ambition. Thomas found those theories in obscure corners of the station's database, marked as conspiracy theories and speculation. Whether the Dravixen had been murdered or simply fallen victim to tragic circumstance, the result was the same. An entire civilization had vanished, leaving behind only ruins and legends. And now, impossibly, one of them lay in a nest of towels on Thomas's desk, chirping for its breakfast. Feeding Little One had become easier as the hatchling gained strength. It now opened its mouth eagerly when Thomas approached with food, and it had graduated from thin paste to small chunks of protein. Thomas had discovered that the creature particularly enjoyed the synthetic poultry products served in the cafeteria, though he had to be careful about how much he purchased without raising suspicion. He varied his routine, buying from different vendors, paying with cash instead of his station account, and generally behaving like someone with something to hide. Because he did have something to hide, station security had begun investigating the broken cargo container in Storage Bay 7. Thomas had heard the gossip in the maintenance break room. The Zenthari had filed a complaint about their damaged property, claiming the contents had been stolen. They were offering a substantial reward for information leading to the recovery of an extremely valuable specimen. The description they provided was vague, but Thomas felt his stomach drop every time someone mentioned it. He considered his options constantly. He could return Little One to the cargo bay and pretend he had found it wandering around. But the hatchling had been on the verge of death when he found it. Returning it now would be a death sentence. He could try to contact Dravixen advocacy groups, if any still existed. But that would mean revealing little one's existence to people who might not have its best interests at heart. He could attempt to smuggle the hatchling off the station, but where would he take it? He had no resources, no connections, and no experience with that kind of illegal activity. So Thomas did the only thing he could do. He kept going, one day at a time, and hoped he could figure out a solution before everything collapsed around him. On the 8th day, something remarkable happened. Thomas was preparing little one's breakfast when he felt a strange sensation in his mind, like a gentle pressure behind his eyes. He froze, the food container forgotten in his hand. The sensation grew stronger, accompanied by a feeling of warmth and curiosity. Little one was staring at him from the nest, its violet eyes locked onto his face. Then, clear as a bell, a thought appeared in his mind that was definitely not his own. Hungry, grateful, safe. Thomas stumbled backward, nearly dropping the food. His heart raced as he stared at the hatchling. Had he imagined it? Was he losing his mind from stress and lack of sleep? But no, the sensation came again, this time with a flavor of concern mixed with confusion. Little one was trying to communicate with him, using the telepathic abilities the Dravixen were famous for. "You can hear my thoughts?" Thomas whispered. He felt foolish talking to what was essentially a baby, but he needed to know if this was real. Another sensation washed over him, this one conveying affirmation mixed with effort. The hatchling was exhausting itself trying to maintain the connection. Thomas sat down slowly, his mind reeling from the implications. Little one wasn't just intelligent, it was actively reaching out to him, forming a bond. The databases had mentioned that Dravixen imprinted on those who cared for them during their early development, creating lifelong connections. Was that what was happening? He approached the nest carefully and set down the food. Little one chirped and began eating, and Thomas felt waves of pleasure and satisfaction through their fledgling mental link. It was overwhelming in its simplicity. The hatchling wasn't trying to manipulate him or convey complex ideas. It was simply sharing its emotional state, a form of communication more honest than words could ever be. Thomas reached out and gently stroked the scales along little one's back. They were warm and surprisingly soft, nothing like the cold reptilian texture he had expected. The hatchling leaned into his touch, and contentment flowed through their connection. For a moment, all of Thomas's worries faded away. Here, in this tiny room, he had created something precious. This creature trusted him completely, depended on him for everything, and offered its affection without reservation. "I won't let anything happen to you," Thomas promised, though he had no idea how he could keep that vow. "I'll figure something out." The mental response was simple but profound. Together, family. Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. When had he last felt like part of a family? His daughter was grown and living her own life. His ex-wife had moved on years ago. He had co-workers, but no real friends. No connections that went deeper than surface pleasantries. He had spent 16 years invisible and alone, accepted that loneliness as the price of his choices. And now this creature, this impossible survivor of an extinct species, was offering him something he hadn't even realized he was missing. The telepathic connection opened new possibilities. Thomas could now understand little one's needs more precisely. He learned that the temperature was still slightly too cold, that the hatchling craved more variety in its diet, and that it was growing bored spending all its time in the nest. Thomas began taking risks, sneaking little one out during his late-night shifts and letting it explore empty corridors under his watchful eye. The hatchling's growth accelerated. Within 2 weeks, it had doubled in size and was beginning to walk with more confidence. Its tail had developed a graceful curve, and small ridges were forming along its spine. Thomas could see the echo of what the Dravixen had once been, creatures of elegance and power, built for a purpose he couldn't quite understand. Little one's intelligence grew as well. Their telepathic conversations became more complex, though still limited by the hatchling's developmental stage and the fact that they didn't share a common language framework. But someone was watching. Thomas had become so focused on Little One that he failed to notice the signs until it was almost too late. Another janitor, a Keltharian named Vrix, had been asking questions about his schedule. Security cameras that normally didn't cover his quarters had been repositioned. And one morning, Thomas found a note slipped under his door. "I know what you're hiding. We should talk." Thomas's hands shook as he read the message. His first instinct was to run, to grab Little One and flee the station somehow. But reason prevailed. Running would only confirm guilt and make them both fugitives. He needed to know who had sent the note and what they wanted. The message had included a location, one of the observation decks on level 15, a public space where they could meet without suspicion. He arrived at the designated time, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The observation deck offered a stunning view of the space beyond the station. Distant stars, passing ships, and the slow rotation of a nearby planet. But Thomas barely noticed the scenery, his attention fixed on the figure standing by the windows. It was Dr. Elara Chen, one of the station's xenobiologists. Thomas knew her only by reputation. She was respected in her field, dedicated to studying and preserving endangered species. She turned as he approached, and her expression was unreadable. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I imagine you're terrified right now." Thomas said nothing, waiting for the trap to spring. Dr. Chen smiled sadly. "I'm not here to turn you in, Thomas. May I call you Thomas?" She continued without waiting for an answer. "I've been monitoring the situation since the Zenthari filed their complaint. I know what was in that container, and I know you took it." "How?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "I have access to cargo manifests that others don't. When I saw what the Zenthari were shipping, I was horrified. A Dravixan hatchling, Thomas. Do you understand how impossible that should be? There haven't been any confirmed sightings of Dravixan in over a century. Most people believe they're completely extinct." Dr. Chen's eyes held a mixture of excitement and fear. "Where did they get it? How is it still alive?" Thomas remained silent, his mind racing through possibilities. Was this a trick? Some elaborate setup to get him to confess? Dr. Chen seemed to sense his distrust. "I'm not working with the Zenthari, if that's what you're worried about. In fact, I despise them. They're the primary reason so many species are on the brink of extinction. They treat living beings as commodities to be bought and sold." She stepped closer, her voice urgent. "Thomas, that hatchling represents something extraordinary. If it's healthy, if it's thriving, then maybe the Dravixan aren't truly gone. Maybe there's hope for their species." "What do you want?" Thomas asked, still wary. "I want to help you keep it alive," Dr. Chen said simply. "And I want to study it, yes, but only with the goal of ensuring its survival and well-being. The Dravixan were remarkable creatures, Thomas. They held the galaxy together in ways we're only beginning to understand now that they're gone. If there's even a chance we can bring them back." She trailed off, her expression almost pleading. Thomas studied her face, searching for deception. He had spent 16 years learning to read people, to spot the liars and the opportunists. Dr. Chen seemed genuine in her passion, but passion could be dangerous too. People did terrible things when they convinced themselves it was for a greater good. "I need to think about it," he said finally. Dr. Chen nodded, understanding. "Take your time, but Thomas, understand this. The Zenthari aren't going to give up their search. They have resources and influence you can't imagine. Eventually, they'll find you. When that happens, you'll need allies." She handed him a data chip. "My personal contact information, encrypted and secure. When you're ready to talk, reach out. I can provide medical supplies, proper food, environmental controls, everything the hatchling needs to not just survive, but flourish." Thomas took the chip, feeling its weight in his palm. It represented a choice, a branching path. Trust this scientist and risk everything, or continue alone and watch as the walls closed in. There's something else you should know, Dr. Chen added. The Zenthari aren't the only ones looking for that hatchling. I've intercepted communications suggesting that several other parties are aware of its existence. Some are collectors who want it for their personal menageries. Others are researchers who would dissect it in the name of science. And a few, she hesitated, a few believe the Dravixans shouldn't be allowed to return. Species that profited from their extinction and have no desire to see that change. The weight of those words settled over Thomas like a heavy blanket. He had known this was dangerous, but hearing it laid out so plainly made it real in a way his imagination hadn't quite captured. Little One wasn't just valuable. It was the center of a storm that was building towards something catastrophic. Why help me? Thomas asked. Why not just take the hatchling yourself? Dr. Chen's smile was tinged with sadness. Because I've read your file, Thomas Webb. I know you've been working this station for 16 years without a single complaint or incident. I know you send most of your salary back to Earth to support your daughter through veterinary school. I know you're a good man who got dealt a hard hand in life. She gestured toward the stars beyond the window. And I know that hatchling bonded with you. Dravixan imprint deeply on their caregivers. Separating you now would traumatize it, possibly fatally. You're not just its rescuer anymore, Thomas. You're its parent. The word hit Thomas like a physical blow. Parent. He had been so focused on keeping Little One alive that he hadn't truly considered what their relationship had become. But Dr. Chen was right. The hatchling didn't see him as a temporary caretaker or a convenient food source. It saw him as family, as the one constant in a terrifying new world. And Thomas realized with stunning clarity that he felt the same way. I'll contact you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Soon. Dr. Chen nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Thomas, that hatchling is special in ways you don't understand yet. Protect it. The galaxy needs what it represents, even if the galaxy doesn't know it yet. Thomas returned to his quarters in a daze, his mind churning through everything Dr. Chen had said. Little One greeted him with a burst of joy through their mental link, oblivious to the danger swirling around them. The hatchling had grown bored waiting alone and was eager to play. Thomas obliged, using a piece of string to create a game that had Little One pouncing and tumbling with kitten-like enthusiasm. As he watched the hatchling play, Thomas made his decision. He couldn't protect Little One alone, not against the forces that were gathering. But he also couldn't blindly trust Dr. Chen or anyone else. He needed leverage, insurance, something that would guarantee Little One's safety regardless of what happened to him. And he had an idea, dangerous, impossibly stupid, but the only plan he could think of that might work. Over the next few days, Thomas began documenting everything. He recorded video of Little One eating, playing, and demonstrating its developing abilities. He wrote detailed logs about the hatchling's growth, its telepathic communication, and the bond they had formed. He compiled all his research about the Dravixan, adding his own observations and theories. And he created multiple copies of everything, storing them in secure locations both on and off the station. If something happened to him, if the Zenthari or anyone else tried to take Little One, this documentation would be released automatically. The galaxy would learn about the hatchling's existence, about the beauty and intelligence of this supposedly extinct species. Public pressure might not save Little One, but it would make it much harder for anyone to simply make the problem disappear. Thomas also reached out to Dr. Chen. Their initial meetings were cautious, conducted in public spaces where they could speak freely without fear of recording. She provided medical scans using portable equipment, confirming what Thomas had suspected. Little One was remarkably healthy given its traumatic start. The hatchling was also growing at a rate that suggested accelerated development, something the databases had hinted at but never confirmed. Dravixan matured quickly during their first year, Dr. Chen explained as she reviewed the scan results. Then their aging slowed dramatically. An adult Dravixen could live for 500 years or more. This one, she shook her head in amazement. This one is developing even faster than the historical records suggest. It's almost as if its body knows it needs to grow up quickly. Why would that be? Thomas asked. I don't know, but Dravixen were never just animals, Thomas. They were connected to something deeper, something most species couldn't understand. Some ancient texts describe them as children of the cosmic web, or walkers between spaces. Most scientists dismiss that as poetic metaphor. But what if it wasn't? What if the Dravixen had abilities we couldn't measure or quantify? Thomas thought about the telepathic connection he shared with Little One. It had been growing stronger and more complex. Sometimes he caught flashes of images that didn't come from his own memory, vast spaces filled with light, patterns of energy that moved with purpose, and a sense of connection to something incomprehensibly large. Were these memories from Little One? Or was the hatchling somehow accessing information from beyond itself? 1 month after finding Little One, everything changed. Thomas was completing his evening rounds when alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed, and automated announcements ordered all personnel to secure their areas and await further instructions. Thomas abandoned his cart and ran for his quarters, his heart in his throat. Had they been discovered? Were security forces coming for Little One right now? He burst through his door to find the hatchling huddled in its nest, frightened by the noise and chaos. Thomas scooped it up and felt its terror through their link. It's okay, he whispered, trying to project calm even though his own fear was overwhelming. I've got you. You're safe. His terminal was flashing with messages. Thomas pulled up the station-wide alert and felt his blood turn to ice. A Zenthari warship had just docked, and its commander was demanding permission to search the entire station. They claimed to have evidence that stolen property was being harbored by station personnel. The station administrator had no choice but to comply. Refusing would be seen as an act of aggression against the Zenthari Empire. Thomas had maybe an hour before search teams reached his quarters. He grabbed his emergency kit, a bag he had prepared weeks ago for exactly this scenario. It contained cash, fake identification documents he had purchased from a less-than-reputable dealer, and supplies for Little One. He wrapped the hatchling in a blanket and tucked it inside his jacket, grateful that it had remained small enough to conceal. His terminal pinged with an incoming message. Dr. Chen, get to Docking Bay 3B, side entrance, now. Thomas didn't hesitate. He slipped out of his quarters and navigated through the service corridors, avoiding the main passages where security would be stationed. Little One remained perfectly still against his chest, seeming to understand that silence was crucial. Through their link, Thomas felt the hatchling's trust in him, its absolute certainty that he would keep it safe. That faith was both humbling and terrifying. Docking Bay 3B was used primarily for small personal craft and cargo shuttles. The side entrance was poorly lit and rarely monitored. Thomas found Dr. Chen waiting beside a small ship, its engines already warming up. She waved him over urgently. We need to leave. Now. She gestured toward the ship's loading ramp. I've filed a flight plan for a research expedition. It'll buy us a few hours before they realize what we've done. Where are we going? Thomas asked as he hurried up the ramp. Somewhere they won't think to look. Dr. Chen sealed the ship and rushed to the pilot's seat. Strap in. This is going to be rough. The ship lifted off with a lurch that threw Thomas into his seat. Little One chirped in alarm, and Thomas held the hatchling close, murmuring reassurances. Through the viewport, he watched Crossroads Station shrink behind them. 16 years of his life, gone in an instant. Everything he owned, everyone he knew, left behind. He was a fugitive now, running from one of the galaxy's most powerful empires, with nothing but a baby alien and a scientist he barely knew. Dr. Chen piloted the ship with surprising skill, weaving through traffic patterns and making sudden course corrections that would make them harder to track. There's a research outpost in the Talon Nebula, she explained as they jumped to faster-than-light travel. It's technically abandoned, but I've been using it for private projects. We can hide there while we figure out our next move. Thomas wanted to ask what their next move could possibly be. They were two humans and a hatchling against an empire. But exhaustion was catching up with him, the adrenaline fading to leave him hollow and shaking. Little one had fallen asleep in his arms, its breathing soft and even. At least the hatchling was safe. For now, that had to be enough. The journey took several hours. Thomas dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound or shift in the ship's movements. Dr. Chen remained at the controls, her face illuminated by the soft glow of instruments. She looked tired but determined, and Thomas found himself grateful for her presence. He still didn't fully trust her. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, but she had risked everything to help them escape. The Talon Nebula was a region of space known for its intense radiation and unpredictable energy fields. Most ships avoided it, making it an ideal hiding spot. Dr. Chen navigated through the outer boundaries with practiced ease, following a path that only someone intimately familiar with the area could manage. Finally, a small station appeared ahead, floating in the midst of swirling cosmic gases. "Welcome to my secret laboratory," Dr. Chen said with a tired smile. "It's not much, but it's home." The outpost was old, probably dating back a century or more, but Dr. Chen had clearly spent time and resources making it habitable. The interior was clean and well-maintained, with living quarters, a research lab, and even a small greenhouse where various plants grew under artificial light. Thomas looked around in amazement. "How did you afford all this?" he asked. "I come from money," Dr. Chen admitted. "My family made their fortune in terraforming. I could have spent my life doing nothing, but that felt like a waste. So I became a scientist, and I've been using my resources to fund conservation efforts the establishment won't touch." She gestured around the station. "This is where I bring creatures that need sanctuary, away from bureaucrats and politicians and people who see them as commodities." Thomas felt little one stirring in his arms. The hatchling woke and looked around curiously, its violet eyes taking in the new environment. Through their link, Thomas felt curiosity mixed with cautious optimism. Little one seemed to sense that this place was safe, that the immediate danger had passed. "Let me show you where you'll be staying," Dr. Chen said, leading them through a corridor. "You'll have your own quarters, much larger than what you had on the station. And there's a specialized enclosure I can adapt for the hatchling as it grows. We'll need to run more tests, establish a proper diet and exercise regimen, and start documenting its development for the archives." "Archives?" Thomas asked. "If the Dravixen are going to have a future, we need to preserve everything we learn. This hatchling might be the only one of its kind, or it might be the first of many. Either way, the knowledge we gather could be vital." Dr. Chen opened a door to reveal a spacious room with real windows looking out onto the nebula. "I know you're exhausted. Get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow about what comes next." Thomas settled into the room with little one, marveling at how much his life had changed in just a few hours. The hatchling explored every corner, chirping with excitement at having more space to move around. Thomas set up a temporary nest using blankets from the bed and watched as little one circled 3 times before curling up contentedly. Through their mental link, Thomas felt the hatchling's emotions settle into peaceful satisfaction. Little one trusted this place, trusted Dr. Chen, and most importantly, trusted him. That trust was a responsibility Thomas had never asked for, but now couldn't imagine giving up. He had saved this creature's life, but in doing so, little one had given his life meaning again. As he drifted off to sleep, Thomas wondered what tomorrow would bring. They were safe for now, hidden in a nebula that most of the galaxy had forgotten. But the Zenthari wouldn't give up their search, and other threats lurked in the shadows. Dr. Chen had said little one represented hope for an entire species. Thomas didn't know if that was true, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would protect this hatchling with everything he had for as long as he drew breath. The galaxy thought the Dravixen were extinct. Thomas and Dr. Chen knew better, and somehow, some way, they would make sure the rest of the universe learned the truth. But first, they needed to help Little One grow strong enough to survive whatever came next. The first weeks at the research outpost established a routine that felt almost normal despite the circumstances. Thomas's days revolved around caring for Little One, who continued to grow at an astounding rate. The hatchling's appetite increased dramatically, requiring Dr. Chen to synthesize complex protein structures in her lab. She also created supplements designed to support the rapid development of Dravixen physiology, working from incomplete historical data and making educated guesses based on genetic analysis. Little One was no longer content to remain in a nest all day. The hatchling demanded exploration, play, and constant mental stimulation. Thomas found himself becoming something between a parent and a teacher, inventing games that challenged Little One's developing intelligence while keeping the hatchling physically active. They played hide-and-seek through the station's corridors, practiced hunting exercises with automated toys, and spent hours in the greenhouse where Little One seemed fascinated by the growing plants. The telepathic bond between them deepened in ways Thomas struggled to articulate. It went beyond simple emotional sharing now. He could sometimes see through Little One's eyes, experiencing the world through senses he didn't fully understand. The hatchling perceived patterns invisible to human vision, hearing frequencies that existed outside Thomas's range. And there were moments when the connection opened wide enough that Thomas glimpsed something vast and terrifying, a sense of space that extended beyond physical dimensions, a reality layered with meanings he couldn't quite grasp. Dr. Chen was fascinated by their bond. She ran countless tests, scanning both Thomas and Little One while they interacted, trying to map the neural pathways involved in their communication. "This is unprecedented," she told Thomas one evening as they reviewed the data. "You're not just receiving telepathic signals from the hatchling. Your brain is actually adapting, creating new connections to process information in ways humans normally can't. It's like Little One is teaching your mind to speak a language it was never designed for." "Is that dangerous?" Thomas asked, concerned. "I don't know," Dr. Chen admitted, "but so far you're showing no signs of neural damage or psychological stress. If anything, you seem healthier than when we first met. Your cognitive functions have improved across the board." She smiled. "It's possible that exposure to Dravixen telepathy has beneficial effects on other species. The historical records mention that diplomats who work closely with Dravixen often live longer and remained mentally sharp into extreme old age." Thomas wasn't sure how he felt about his brain being rewired by an alien hatchling, but he couldn't deny the changes. His memory had sharpened, his ability to focus had increased, and he found himself understanding complex concepts more quickly than before. It was as if Little One's presence was optimizing his neural efficiency. Meanwhile, Dr. Chen continued her research on multiple fronts. She maintained a network of contacts throughout the galaxy, gathering information about the search for the stolen Dravixen. The news was troubling. The Zenthari had mobilized significant resources, offering enormous bounties for information leading to Little One's recovery. They claimed the hatchling was a critical research specimen, essential to understanding a dangerous disease. The lie was transparent to anyone who knew the truth, but most of the galaxy accepted the official story without question. More concerning were the other groups that had emerged. A coalition of collectors calling themselves the Preservation Society had announced their intention to rescue the hatchling from incompetent caregivers. Several governments had filed legal claims asserting their right to study the creature. And most worrying of all, an extremist organization known as the Purity Alliance had declared that the Dravixen must not be allowed to return, calling them corruptors of the natural order, and promising to eliminate any survivors. "We can't hide here forever," Dr. Chen said during one of their planning sessions. "Eventually, someone will find us. We need to think bigger, create a situation where taking little one by force becomes impossible. What do you mean? Thomas asked. We need to go public, but on our terms. Show the galaxy that the Dravixen aren't just curiosities or threats. They're living, thinking beings who deserve protection and respect. Dr. Chen pulled up images on her terminal. I have contacts in the galactic media, journalists who would kill for this story. If we can arrange a carefully controlled revelation, complete with video evidence and scientific documentation, we can shift public opinion in our favor. Thomas looked at Little One, who was dozing in a patch of artificial sunlight. The hatchling looked peaceful, innocent, completely unaware of the forces arrayed against it. Will that be enough? Public opinion didn't save them last time. No, Dr. Chen agreed, but the galaxy has changed since the Dravixen disappeared. There are more protections for endangered species now, more oversight of organizations like the Zenthari. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. And if we can demonstrate that Little One is intelligent, sapient, capable of communication, then legally, it's not property, it's a person. The idea was both brilliant and terrifying. Personhood would grant Little One rights under galactic law, making it much harder for anyone to simply take possession of the hatchling. But it would also put Little One directly in the spotlight, making them the center of a political firestorm that could go horribly wrong. We need more time, Thomas said. Little One is still developing. We don't even know what it will become when fully mature. How can we prove personhood when we're still learning what that means for Dravixen? Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. You're right, we'll wait, but we need to prepare for that moment. Every interaction with Little One should be documented. Every milestone, every demonstration of intelligence or ability. We're building a case, Thomas, and it needs to be absolutely bulletproof. The months that followed were intense and purposeful. Thomas became more than just a caretaker. He became Little One's window into understanding the galaxy beyond their hidden sanctuary. He taught the hatchling about different species, showed it recordings of various worlds and cultures, and explained concepts like government, law, and society. Little One absorbed everything with a hunger that was almost frightening. The hatchling's telepathic abilities expanded dramatically. What had started as simple emotional sharing evolved into genuine conversation. Little One could now project thoughts in a form resembling language, though the concepts often came wrapped in sensory data and emotional context that made them richer but harder to translate. The hatchling asked endless questions about everything, displaying a curiosity that reminded Thomas of human children, but with a depth of understanding that seemed far beyond its apparent age. Why did my people die? Little One asked one day, the thought words carrying a weight of sadness that made Thomas's chest ache. He had been dreading this conversation. I don't know for certain, Thomas answered honestly, speaking aloud while projecting his thoughts. The records say a plague killed them, but some people think it might have been something worse, something deliberate. Why would others kill us? The confusion in Little One's mental voice was heartbreaking. The concept of genocide seemed beyond the hatchling's ability to comprehend. Because your people were powerful, Thomas said carefully. They tried to keep peace, to make sure different species treated each other fairly. Some people didn't like that. They wanted to do whatever they wanted without anyone stopping them. Little One was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Then, are we the last? I don't know, Thomas admitted. Maybe, or maybe there are others, hiding like you were, waiting for it to be safe. When will it be safe? Thomas had no answer for that. He simply held the hatchling close and tried to project comfort through their bond. Little One had been robbed of so much: family, culture, heritage. The hatchling should have been raised by its own kind, learning the wisdom and ways of the Dravixen. Instead, it had a janitor and a scientist, two humans doing their best, but painfully aware of how inadequate they were as substitutes for an entire civilization. Dr. Chen provided what she could. She had uncovered fragments of Dravixian literature and philosophy in ancient databases, texts that had been preserved more as historical curiosities than anything else. She translated them as best she could and shared them with Little One. The hatchling devoured these fragments, reading and rereading texts written in languages it had never been taught, but somehow understood instinctively. One evening, Thomas found Little One in the greenhouse, sitting motionless among the plants. Through their bond, he felt something different from the hatchling, a sense of connection extending beyond their usual link, reaching out to touch the living things around them. The plants themselves seemed to respond, their leaves turning toward Little One, even though the hatchling wasn't near the light source. "What are you doing?" Thomas asked softly. "Listening," Little One replied. "Everything alive speaks. The plants, the bacteria in the soil, even the station itself has a kind of voice. I can hear them all, feel how they connect to each other. Is this normal?" Thomas had no idea. Dr. Chen, when informed, was equally baffled. The ancient texts mentioned something they called the life web, a network of consciousness that supposedly connected all living things. Most scientists assumed it was metaphorical. But if Little One can actually perceive something like that, the implications were staggering. If the Dravixen could sense and potentially communicate with the fundamental forces of life itself, no wonder other species had found them unsettling. That kind of power, that kind of connection, would make them almost godlike in comparison to races that saw themselves as separate from nature. Little One continued to grow, now reaching the size of a large dog. The hatchling's body was changing, becoming more robust and graceful. The ridges along its spine had developed into a series of elegant plates that could extend or retract. Its tail had lengthened, ending in a fan-like structure that served both as a balance aid and, they discovered, a sensory organ capable of detecting electromagnetic fields. The hatchling's coloration shifted as well. The pearl-white scales darkened to a deep blue-gray, with patterns of iridescent color that seemed to flow across its body like oil on water. Little One was becoming beautiful in an alien way, a creature that demanded attention and respect simply by existing. As months turned into a year, Thomas realized they couldn't hide forever. Dr. Chen's contacts reported that the search for Little One had intensified rather than fading. The bounty had increased to an amount that would make anyone wealthy for life. Pirates, bounty hunters, and opportunists of every species were scouring the galaxy for any hint of where the hatchling might be hidden. The research outpost had remained secure, but that security was an illusion. It only took one person getting lucky, one ship scanning the right sector at the right time, and their sanctuary would be discovered. Thomas lived with constant anxiety, jumping at every sensor alert, his sleep plagued by nightmares of Zenthari soldiers breaking through the airlock. Little One seemed to sense his fear and tried to comfort him. "Don't be afraid," the hatchling would project. "I'm getting stronger. Soon I'll be able to protect us." The statement was touching but unrealistic. Little One might be developing impressive abilities, but what could one juvenile alien do against a warship? Thomas didn't voice these doubts, unwilling to undermine the hatchling's confidence, but he and Dr. Chen had to face reality. "It's time," Dr. Chen said during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "We've documented everything. We have proof of Little One's intelligence, sapience, and unique abilities. We have testimony from both of us about the conditions we found it in and the lengths the Zenthari have gone to reclaim what they still call property. We have enough to make a compelling case." Thomas wanted to argue, to demand more time, but he knew she was right. They had delayed as long as they dared. "Who do we contact first?" "I have a journalist, Kira Voss. She's Thalaxian, which means she has no love for the Zenthari and no allegiance to any of the other major powers. She's known for breaking stories that others are afraid to touch. If anyone can get this out to the galaxy in a way that protects Little One, it's her." The decision made, they prepared for the most important moment of their journey. Dr. Chen arranged a secure communication channel, one encrypted and routed through so many relays that tracing it would be nearly impossible. Thomas spent hours with Little One, explaining what was about to happen and why it was necessary. "We're going to tell everyone about you," Thomas said. "People across the entire galaxy will learn that the Dravixen aren't extinct. They'll see you, hear you, know that you're real." Little One's response was complex, mixing fear with determination. "Will they try to take me away from you?" "Some will try," Thomas admitted, "but we're not going to let that happen. Dr. Chen thinks that once people see how intelligent you are, how special you are, the law will protect you. You won't be property anymore. You'll be recognized as a person, with rights." "What if it doesn't work?" Thomas pulled the hatchling close, wrapping his arms around the increasingly large body. "Then we run again. We keep running until we find somewhere truly safe. I'm not giving up on you, Little One. Never." The interview with Kira Voss took place 3 days later. The Thalaxian journalist appeared on their screen, her crystalline features reflecting the light in patterns that Thomas found mesmerizing. She listened intently as Dr. Chen explained the situation, occasionally interrupting with sharp, insightful questions. Then it was time to introduce Little One. The hatchling entered the frame with Thomas, and Kira's entire demeanor changed. Her crystalline body shifted colors, a Thalaxian expression of profound surprise. "By the cosmic depths," she breathed, "it's real, an actual Dravixen. We all thought they were gone forever." "Not all of us," Little One projected, the telepathic message strong enough to reach Kira despite the communication barrier. The journalist flinched in surprise, then leaned forward eagerly. "You can speak? Telepathically?" "Yes," Little One confirmed. "I can speak to anyone willing to listen. I can share thoughts, emotions, memories. My people were known for this ability. We used it to help others understand each other, to bridge the gaps between species that language alone couldn't cross." Kira was silent for a moment, clearly communicating with her production team off-screen. Then she nodded. "We're recording everything. This is going to shake the galaxy to its foundations. But I need to know, are you safe? If we broadcast this, every hunter and opportunist in known space will come looking for you." "We're as safe as we can be," Dr. Chen answered. "But that's not the point. Hiding won't work forever. We need to force the issue, make it impossible for the Zenthari or anyone else to simply snatch Little One and make the problem disappear." The interview lasted for hours. Kira asked questions about Little One's origins, capabilities, and treatment. She recorded demonstrations of the hatchling's telepathic abilities, its connection to the life web, and its rapidly developing intelligence. Thomas and Dr. Chen provided documentation, medical scans, and testimony about everything that had happened since that night in Storage Bay 7. When it was over, Kira looked at them with something approaching awe. "I need 24 hours to prepare this for broadcast. I'll be coordinating releases across multiple platforms simultaneously, making it impossible to suppress. Once this goes live, your lives will never be the same. Are you prepared for that?" Thomas looked at Little One, then at Dr. Chen. They had come so far, risked so much. There was no turning back now. "Do it," he said. The day the story broke, the galaxy stopped. Kira Voss's broadcast went out through every major news network simultaneously, bypassing the usual editorial controls and censorship. The images of Little One spread like wildfire across the data networks. A living, thinking Dravixen, proof that an entire species might yet be saved from extinction. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Some people celebrated, seeing the hatchling as a symbol of hope and resilience. Others expressed outrage that such an important discovery had been kept secret. The Zenthari issued furious denials, claiming the whole thing was an elaborate hoax. But independent scientists quickly verified the authenticity of the footage, and their confirmation only amplified the story. Within hours, the Galactic Council called an emergency session. For the first time in decades, representatives from across known space gathered to address a single issue. The question before them was simple but profound. What should be done about the last Dravixen? Thomas, Dr. Chen, and Little One watched the proceedings from their hidden outpost, monitoring the broadcasts with a mixture of hope and dread. The debate was heated. The Zenthari demanded that Little One be turned over to them immediately, citing their legal claim of ownership. Several other governments argued that the hatchling should be placed in neutral custody for study. Conservation groups called for Little One's complete freedom, and the Purity Alliance, true to their extremist nature, advocated for the hatchling's destruction. But then something unexpected happened. A delegate from the Meridian Collective, a federation known for their philosophical approach to governance, rose to speak. We have heard much debate about what should be done with this Dravixen, but I noticed that no one has asked the Dravixen itself what it wants. If this being is truly intelligent and sapient, as the evidence clearly shows, then why are we discussing it as if it has no voice? The chamber fell silent. It was such a simple observation, yet somehow in all the political maneuvering and legal arguments, everyone had forgotten to consider Little One as an actual person with agency and desires. The Meridian delegate continued, I propose that we speak directly with the Dravixen. Let it address this council. Let it demonstrate its intelligence and make its own case. Then we can make an informed decision about its status. The proposal was radical. Never before had a newly discovered sapient been given the opportunity to advocate for itself before the Galactic Council. But the circumstances were equally unprecedented. After heated debate, the council agreed. Little One would be given the chance to speak. Dr. Chen worked furiously to set up a secure communication link that would allow Little One to address the council without revealing the outpost location. Thomas sat with the hatchling, trying to prepare it for what was about to happen. This is everything, he said. If you can convince them that you deserve to be free, that you're a person and not property, we win. But if they decide otherwise, then we run, Little One finished. The hatchling's mental voice carried a confidence that Thomas wished he felt. But I don't think we'll need to run. I know what to say. The appointed time arrived. The Galactic Council chamber, filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds, fell silent as Little One's image appeared on their screens. The hatchling looked directly into the camera, its violet eyes somehow managing to make contact with each viewer. My name is yet unspoken by my own kind, for I am the last to know their true language, Little One began, projecting thoughts that translation systems rendered into hundreds of languages simultaneously. You know me only as the Dravixen hatchling, a curiosity, a specimen, perhaps a threat. But I ask you to see me as I am, a child robbed of its family, its culture, its birthright. I did not choose to be the last. I did not choose to become a symbol or a prize. I simply chose to live. The council chamber remained silent, transfixed by the hatchling's words. My people are gone, taken by forces I still do not fully understand, but I carry their legacy within me, not just their genetics, but their knowledge, their purpose, their dream of a galaxy where different beings could live together in understanding and peace. That dream did not die with them. It lives in me, and it lives in the humans who chose to save my life, despite the cost to themselves. Little One paused, and when it spoke again, its mental voice carried a weight that seemed impossible from such a young being. You debate what should be done with me, but the question you should ask is, what kind of galaxy do you want to be? One where the powerful claim ownership of the living? Where species are commodities to be bought and sold? Where those who are different must hide or die? Or one where every being, regardless of origin or capability, is granted dignity and the right to exist freely? I am Dravixen. I am sapient. I am aware. I feel. I think. I dream. I am not property. I am not a specimen. I am not a tool or a weapon or a prize. I am myself, unique and irreplaceable, and I claim the right to live as myself with those who have shown me kindness in whatever peace we can find. The chamber erupted. Representatives argued, shouted, and pleaded their cases. But something had shifted. Little One had spoken with such clarity and power that denying its personhood had become impossible. Even the Zenthari, faced with undeniable evidence of sapience, had to modify their arguments. They no longer claimed ownership, but instead argued for protective custody and scientific study. The debate raged for days. Thomas and Dr. Chen barely slept, monitoring every development, ready to flee at the first sign that the decision might go against them. But slowly, miraculously, a consensus began to emerge. The Meridian Collective's motion for immediate recognition of Dravixan personhood gained support from an unlikely coalition of worlds. Even species that normally opposed each other found common ground in this. Finally, after 5 days of continuous session, the Galactic Council reached its decision. The vote was overwhelming. Little One would be recognized as a sapient being with full legal rights and protections. The hatchling could not be claimed as property, could not be forcibly detained for study, and could not be harmed without facing the full weight of galactic law. The Zenthari tried one final gambit, claiming that Little One was too young to make its own decisions and should be placed in supervised care. But Dr. Chen had anticipated this. She presented testimony from dozens of experts, confirming that Dravixan matured rapidly and that Little One demonstrated cognitive abilities exceeding many adult members of other species. The argument collapsed, and the Zenthari had no choice but to accept defeat. Thomas wept when the final decision was announced. Little One was free, truly, legally free. No one could take the hatchling away. No one could force them apart. The fight wasn't completely over. There would be legal challenges, attempts to circumvent the ruling, and ongoing threats from extremist groups. But they had won the battle that mattered most. Little One climbed into Thomas's lap, despite being far too large for it, and they held each other while Dr. Chen celebrated. Through their bond, Thomas felt the hatchling's overwhelming relief mixed with something else, a sense of purpose, of destiny beginning to unfold. "What will you do now?" Dr. Chen asked later, once the initial euphoria had faded. "You're free to go anywhere, be anything." Little One was quiet for a long moment, then looked at Thomas. "I want to find others like me. If they exist, if even one more of my kind survives, I need to find them. We need to find them." Thomas nodded, understanding immediately. Little One deserved to know its own species, to be part of a community that understood it in ways humans never could. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll search every corner of the galaxy if we have to." Dr. Chen smiled. "I know where to start. There are rumors, unconfirmed sightings, old stories about hidden Dravixan sanctuaries. I always dismissed them as wishful thinking, but now..." She pulled up star charts on her terminal. "Now I think we should investigate every single one." The broadcast of Little One's speech to the Galactic Council changed more than just the hatchling's legal status. It sparked a movement. Across the galaxy, people began questioning the treatment of other species, particularly those on the brink of extinction. Conservation efforts received unprecedented funding. Laws protecting sapient rights were strengthened. And most surprisingly, information about the Dravixan began emerging from unexpected sources. Former Zenthari officials came forward with confessions about their empire's role in the Dravixan extinction. They revealed that the plague had indeed been engineered, a biological weapon deployed 2 centuries ago because the Dravixan refused to support Zenthari expansion into disputed territories. The revelations shook the empire to its foundations. Protests erupted on Zenthari worlds as citizens demanded accountability from their government. But the most significant development came from a message that arrived 3 weeks after the Council's decision. It was heavily encrypted and bore no identifying information about its origin. When Dr. Chen finally broke the encryption, they found themselves looking at a video of another Dravixen, an adult, older than Little One, but clearly of the same species. "If you are seeing this, then the hatchling survived," the adult Dravixen said, its mental voice powerful and resonant. "We dared not hope, but we prepared contingencies nonetheless. Know that you are not alone, young one. We have hidden ourselves, waiting for the day when it would be safe to emerge. That day may yet be distant, but your courage has brought it closer." The message provided coordinates to a remote system far beyond the boundaries of charted space. It warned of dangers and difficulties in reaching it, but promised that those who made the journey would find sanctuary and truth. Little One watched the message over and over, drinking in the sight of an adult of its species, like someone dying of thirst. "We have to go," Little One said, its mental voice leaving no room for debate. "They're out there, waiting. My people are alive." Thomas looked at the coordinates and felt his heart sink. The journey would take months, possibly years. They would be traveling into completely unmapped territory, with no support and no way to call for help if something went wrong. It was insane, reckless, and possibly suicidal. "When do we leave?" he asked. Dr. Chen laughed, though the sound held notes of both excitement and terror. "Give me a week to outfit a proper ship. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." The preparation period felt both too long and too short. Dr. Chen used her family's resources to purchase a small but well-equipped exploration vessel, one capable of sustaining them for extended journeys. She stocked it with supplies, medical equipment, and defensive systems. Thomas spent his time with Little One, strengthening their bond and preparing mentally for the challenges ahead. News of their planned journey leaked somehow, perhaps through one of Dr. Chen's contacts, or perhaps someone had been monitoring their communications despite the encryption. Regardless of the source, the galaxy learned that the last known Dravixen was embarking on a quest to find others of its kind. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of ships volunteered to join them, forming a protective convoy. Scientists, adventurers, and idealists all wanted to be part of the expedition, but Little One refused most of them. "This journey is dangerous," the hatchling explained through public broadcasts. "I will not risk lives unnecessarily. Those who insist on coming must understand that I cannot guarantee their safety or success." In the end, a small fleet formed, 5 ships in total, including their own. The other vessels contained a mix of security personnel volunteered by the Meridian Collective, scientists from various fields, and a documentary team determined to record whatever they found. It was far more attention than Thomas would have preferred, but Dr. Chen convinced him it was necessary. "If we disappear into uncharted space with no witnesses, our enemies will have free rein to spin whatever narrative they want," she explained. "But if others are with us, recording everything, we have insurance. The galaxy will be watching." The departure was broadcast across every major network. Millions watched as the small fleet launched from the outpost in the Talon Nebula, heading toward coordinates that most analysts agreed were likely pointing toward nothing but empty space. The skeptics called it a fool's errand. The believers called it humanity's greatest adventure. Little Ones simply called it going home. The journey tested them all in ways they hadn't anticipated. Uncharted space was called that for good reason. The hazards were both numerous and unpredictable. They encountered radiation storms that forced them to halt for days, while their ship's systems underwent repairs. Strange gravitational anomalies pulled them off course, requiring constant navigation adjustments. And on one terrifying occasion, they stumbled into the territory of a species that attacked first and asked questions never. The convoy survived that encounter, but one of the ships suffered severe damage and had to turn back. The documentary team got incredible footage of Little One using its developing abilities to help negotiate with the hostile aliens, somehow communicating concepts that transcended language barriers and convincing them that the fleet meant no harm. The footage went viral across the galaxy, further cementing Little One's status as something extraordinary. As months of travel stretched into a full year, Little One continued to grow and develop. The hatchling was now the size of a large horse, its body powerful and graceful. The plates along its spine had become more pronounced, and its coloration had deepened into shades of midnight blue, shot through with patterns that seemed to shift, like starlight. More importantly, its abilities had expanded in ways that both fascinated and worried Thomas. Little One could now communicate telepathically with multiple individuals simultaneously, maintaining distinct conversations with each. The hatchling's connection to the lifeweb had strengthened to the point where it could sense living beings through walls and across significant distances. And most remarkably, Little One had begun to demonstrate what Dr. Chen called probability intuition, a sense for which choices would lead to favorable outcomes, as if the hatchling could perceive the branching paths of potential futures. "Is this normal for your species?" Thomas asked one night as they sat together in the observation lounge, watching stars streak past. "I don't know," Little One admitted. "I have no baseline for comparison. Perhaps all Dravixen develop these abilities, or perhaps my circumstances have forced me to grow in unusual ways. I am learning as I go, discovering capabilities I never knew I possessed." "Does it frighten you?" Little One considered the question. "Sometimes. I feel myself becoming something beyond what I was, and I wonder if I'll lose parts of myself in the transformation. But I also feel purpose crystallizing within me. My people served a role in the galaxy, and that role was not simply to keep peace between species. We were maintainers of something deeper, something I'm only beginning to understand." Thomas wanted to ask what that meant, but exhaustion claimed him before he could form the words. He fell asleep in the observation lounge, and when he woke hours later, he found that Little One had draped its tail over him like a blanket. The gesture was so simple, so caring, that Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. This incredible being, this last remnant of an extinct civilization, still found ways to show affection to an aging human janitor who had simply been in the right place at the right time. Finally, after 14 months of travel, they reached the coordinates provided in the message. The location was a star system unlike any in the databases, a trinary star formation with 7 planets orbiting in a complex dance of gravitational harmony. One of those planets showed signs of artificial structures, massive constructs that had somehow escaped detection by any previous survey. As the fleet approached, they received a transmission. It was the adult Dravixen from the recorded message, but now speaking in real time. "Welcome, travelers. Welcome home, young one. You have come far and proven your courage. Now comes the moment of truth. Will you trust us enough to land on our world and learn what we have preserved?" Little One answered without hesitation. "Yes, I have traveled across the galaxy to find my people. I will not turn back now." They landed on a planet that took Thomas's breath away. Vast forests of crystalline trees stretched to the horizon, their branches singing in winds that carried harmonics almost like music. Structures rose from the landscape, not buildings exactly, but organic-looking constructs that seemed grown rather than built. And everywhere, life thrived in forms both familiar and utterly alien. The welcoming party numbered dozens, all Dravixen of various ages and sizes. Little One stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sight of its own kind. Then an ancient Dravixen, its scales so dark they appeared black and covered in patterns of silver that marked its great age, approached. It moved slowly, with dignity and care, until it stood before Little One. "Welcome, child of scattered clutches," the elder said, its mental voice carrying harmonics of deep emotion. "I am Keeper Thessalon, guardian of this sanctuary. We have waited long for this day. Come, there is much to show you, much to teach, and much to heal." Little One looked back at Thomas, uncertainty flickering through their bond. Thomas smiled despite the tears streaming down his face. "Go," he said. "This is what you needed. This is what you deserve." The hatchling hesitated, then projected a thought filled with love and gratitude. "You saved my life. You gave me everything. I will never forget. But I need you to understand, this is not goodbye. You are part of my story, part of who I am. My people may raise me now, teach me, help me grow, but you will always be family." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. He watched as Little One walked forward to join the other Dravixen, watched as they surrounded the hatchling with gestures of welcome and acceptance. This was right. This was how it should be. And if his heart broke a little at seeing Little One slip away into a world he couldn't fully share, well, that was the price of love. Dr. Chen stood beside him, her own eyes wet. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." Over the following weeks, Thomas and the others learned the truth about the Dravixen. They had not been completely destroyed by the plague. A warning had reached some of their worlds in time, allowing a few thousand to flee into the deepest reaches of space. They had hidden here, in this remote system, for 2 centuries. They had watched the galaxy tear itself apart without their mediation, had seen species rise and fall, and had mourned their inability to help. But they had also prepared. The Dravixen were patient, thinking in time frames that spanned generations. They had slowly, carefully, begun breeding programs to rebuild their numbers. They had preserved their knowledge, their culture, their technology, and they had waited for a sign that it might be safe to emerge. Little One was that sign. The hatchling's survival and the subsequent recognition of Dravixen personhood by the Galactic